What's going on? Welcome to Tech with Sean, and it's 2022. We're getting new laptops from all the different makers. We've got Alder Lake CPUs, new Ryzen CPUs, 3070 Ti's, 3080 Ti's, but there's still a lot of value in picking up a 2021 laptop, in my opinion. That's why I just picked up this Legion 5 Pro Gen 6 with a 3070. Alright, well there's definite improvements in the newer laptops. We have faster CPUs, faster GPUs, we have DDR5 instead of DDR4. That's not necessarily the end of the story, and with as much as they've raised the prices on the 2022 models, I think it still makes more sense to buy a 2021 model at this point in time. First off, let's talk about CPUs, since that's arguably the biggest difference with the newest year's laptops. Now you have Alder Lake and Ryzen 6000, which have IPC improvements and they are faster. But even last year's models, the 11th gen Intel as well as Ryzen 5000, like in this, are still plenty to saturate all of the current generation GPUs. So that means in games, you're maybe not going to see a big difference unless it's a game that's CPU limited, which in actuality is pretty rare on a laptop, especially one like this where you're running games at like 1600p. So if you do use your laptop for like rendering videos all the time or really specifically CPU intensive tasks, then a newer one may make more sense, but for strictly gaming, I think the CPUs and the 2021 models are still more than enough to push the current generation of GPUs. Next, let's talk about the GPUs. Now the 2022 models have the 3070 Ti and 3080 Ti as options, and they are a little bit faster. I've seen, depending on the game and resolution, you can get between maybe a 5 or 10% improvement, but it's not like a generational leap, and I think you're better off saving some money now, and then if you want to go all out and buy the ballingest laptop ever, do that next year when the 4000 series drops, because the difference between a 3070 and 3070 Ti is not going to be very much if you compare like 3070 Ti to 4070 probably, because those generational leaps are really where we get the big gains and not the little Super or Ti like in between updates. Overall, they are a little faster, but I think a 3070 is going to remain a viable GPU for gaming just about as long as a 3070 Ti. And if you want to get the best of the best, then I think you should wait for the next generation, really. Unless you need it today for some reason or another. The other big difference in the 2022 laptops is that a lot of them are shipping with DDR5 memory, and that does have some differences for laptops. I'm not an expert on memory, but from what I've seen, each stick of DDR5 operates in dual channel mode, so you won't run into problems like you did on previous gen Ryzen laptops where if you only had single channel memory, it could really hamper performance, and it was more sensitive whether you had single rank or dual rank because of the bandwidth and how it just processes the data. But with DDR5, I believe the bandwidth is increased, as well as each stick being able to operate as dual channel in itself is going to make it much less sensitive for gaming, and it's not going to be like last gen where you could get one kit that could really hamper performance a bunch. I mean, you still might see improvements with a faster DDR5 kit, but it's not going to be as sensitive as it was in DDR4, where the processors were really being held back sometimes by the bandwidth of the memory. Alright, now our last and probably most important point of comparison is going to be pricing. And if you haven't noticed, the pricing on 2022 laptops is way up compared to 2021. This Legion 5 Pro, for instance, I believe usually sold for around $1,700 or $1,800, and this has a 3070 and 5800H, and I got this on sale for $13.99, which I think is a killer deal. But if you look at the 2022 models, they're selling one with the 3050 Ti for like $1,700. But if you compare like last year's models and you extrapolate what they charge to upgrade from a 3050 Ti to 3060 to 3070, and then start on the 2022 and add some upgrades using that 3050 Ti base price that they have as a starter, you can see that by the time they put out the 3070 model, I think it's going to be up over $2,000, and for that 10% or so performance in game gains, I don't think it's worth it. I think you're way better off buying the last year's model, dropping in a big storage drive, maybe even upgrading to dual rank faster RAM, and getting a really similar experience to what you're going to get with a more expensive 2022 model, but for way less money overall. So that's my thoughts on 2021 versus 2022 laptops. Stay tuned, and I'm going to cover some more of this laptop specifically because it's still being in stock sometimes at Walmart for $13.99. And if you can get one for that price, I think this is a screaming deal, and it's a really good one to pick up even still today. This Legion 5 Pro came with the Ryzen 7 5800H. It had 16 gigabytes of memory, a 512 gigabyte SSD, and this has the really nice 16 by 10, I believe 500 nit, 2560 by 1600 IPS screen with G-Sync. For sheer gaming performance, this is pretty great because you're getting 140 watts on the GPU, and that's gonna still do really well compared to 2022 laptops. For instance, I looked at the 2022 M16, and that only goes up to 120 watts on the 3070 Ti, and this thing, since it pushes 140 watts, outperforms it in GPU performance. If I compare the TimeSpy scores between this and that 2022 M16, they're really similar. It's interesting. With both of their stock settings, like this one in performance mode and the M16 in turbo mode, they both got in between 10,000 and 11,000 for the overall score. And then with a little bit of GPU overclocking on both, they were each able to go over 11,000. The interesting part of the breakdown is that on the M16, it has the Alder Lake CPU, so it had a CPU score that was higher than this, but this had a higher GPU score and actually a higher overall score. So the Zephyrus is a little bit more portable, but it's just going to show you that having the newer chips isn't everything, and having, high wattage parts or something decent from last year is going to keep it really competitive, and you don't necessarily need to go out and spend the extra $500 to just have the newest model. I did throw in dual rank memory to this thing, so it went from having 16 gigabytes of single rank memory in the default configuration to now having 32 gigs of dual rank memory. And when I was looking at benchmarks, that in some cases increased my CPU performance from 5 to 10%, which is pretty nice, and it made a noticeable difference to the 1% lows in games that push the CPU a little bit more, like Forza Horizon 5 is one that I play, and it will push the Ryzen laptop CPU pretty well, and because of the fast motion, you really notice the difference in the 1% lows. I do really like this laptop, and overall it's pretty nice. Nice numpad, nice keyboard, really nice screen. It's not too light and portable at all. It's kind of heavy, but it feels like it's built pretty solidly at least. It's not all perfect. It does have a couple of quirks though. There's no manual fan control. I wish there was more RGB options in the Lenovo Vantage software, and the speakers are pretty lame as far as laptop speakers go. Now let's take a look at some benchmarks in games and see how this Ryzen 5800H and 3070 really stack up. We already took a look at TimeSpy, so I ran 3D Mark Firestrike, and this is an older benchmark, but I figured, why not? And this got over 24,000, which is a really respectable score, of course. Next, I ran Forza Horizon 5's benchmark, and this is at the native resolution 1600p on the ultra settings, and this clocked in with 71 frames per second with really respectable lows. Next up is Horizon Zero Dawn, and we ran this also at the native resolution on the ultimate quality settings, and this got an average of 79 frames per second. Now we have Red Dead Redemption. I'm running this on a mix of different settings. Most of them are on high or ultra, but this is at the native resolution. And this did a really good job, staying well above 60 frames per second, and this would be really playable on these settings. At the end of the benchmark here, we got an average of 68 frames per second. Next up is Cyberpunk 2077, and I'm running this at 1200p. And we started with the Ray Tracing Medium preset. I turned the volumetrics down to medium, and then in the ray tracing settings, I'm turning off the local shadows, and I'm going to turn the DLSS onto quality mode. And we're going to run the benchmark with this combination of settings, and we get in between 50 frames per second about at the lowest, and then once this benchmark moves outside, you'll see the frame rate increase a little bit, and it will get up to around 70 frames per second at its highest. So mostly between 50 to 70 frames per second. And in this type of game, on a panel with G-Sync, I think this is actually a pretty playable experience. It would be nice to have, you know, rock solid locked 60 all the time, but if you want to do that, you're going to have to turn down the settings and maybe turn off ray tracing. And I think that, you know, at these settings, you get some of the benefits of ray tracing, you get some of the cool lighting effects and stuff, and you still maintain a playable frame rate at a decent resolution. So, I don't know. You can do whatever you want, but I would run something like a mix of these settings if I was going to play through Cyberpunk on one of these Legion 5 Pros. And you'll see here at the end results screen of the benchmark, this averaged 60 frames per second on the dot. And finally, we've got Strange Brigade, and we're running this at the native 1600p resolution on the ultra settings again. And this is not a CPU heavy game, so it's able to boost that GPU up to 140 watts or so for most of the time. And this runs this game with no problems, coming in with an average of 127 frames per second. Well, as you can see, this thing is pretty much a beast for games, even at 1600p. I think if you pick one of these up, you're going to be happy with it for several years to come. It's going to remain pretty competitive, even with the 2022 models, I believe, because the Ryzen 5800H can pretty much fully saturate the 3070 in just about every gaming situation. It has a really great screen, and that's something that people sometimes, I think, overlook on laptops. That's something you can't upgrade, and you're basically going to be looking at it all the time for gaming. So I applaud these companies for starting to put out more QHD screens, 16 by 10 screens, stuff with good color gamut, G-Sync, really what people have been asking for a while now. So while this might not be the newest laptop, and it does have some quirks, it's still really powerful, and I think it has years of life left ahead of it. So if you can find one of these for the $13.99 sale price, I say go ahead and snag one before they sell out. Alright, thank you for watching. I hope this video was entertaining. If it was, give it a like down below. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet, and I'll see you in the next video.